Experimental mixed media drawing. In my last video, we used the grid method to sketch out a complex photograph as accurately as possible. For the next stage, we will be applying dark tone to the background. Try to use a soft high B pencil if you have one, such as a 6B, an 8B. I'm actually using a 9B. But if all you have is maybe a 2B or 4B, that will do. Make sure it's nice and sharp, and then as you see me in my demo now, I'm simply overlapping circles again and again and again, trying to achieve a smooth gradient of dark tone. The higher the B pencil you're using and the more pressure you apply and the more overlapping layers of circles, the darker and more even your tone will be. Make sure that you're working on a smooth surface so that your pencil marks don't pick up any scratches from below. And because we're going to be using so much graphite, there's a real chance of smudging, so you can see that I have put a piece of printer paper underneath my hand to try to avoid this. So once the background is done, we will be working in coffee to add a wash over, and before this putting down some resist marks. I'm experimenting with some resist marks now. Before my next stage, I'm conducting a series of experiments. The first tool that I'm using there is a wax oil pastel. The second one is a household candle. The third one is white oil pastel. The fourth one is a coral wax crayon. And the last one, I'm ripping up bits of masking tape, making sure that's really stuck down to the paper. And then I'm putting the coffee stain on top, letting it dry, and then peeling it away to reveal the white protected paper. Hopefully you have one of these things at home. I'll be using the first one. You just saw me squirt some antibac into a little pot. Hopefully you've all got some of this at home at the moment. So the alcohol content in this will react with the blue pen that I'll be using to make a really lovely effect. So you can see me now. I've waited for all of my little experiments to dry, and then I'm going over them, just seeing what effects each one will achieve when I add the biro pen marks afterwards, and then I go over with a paintbrush that has antibac on it. So you can see I get some really lovely bleeding, some lovely lighter tones happening, and then actually if I dip my blue biro straight in the antibac and go back in with that after, I get some really, really lovely bright dark tones of the blue pigment. On the side over here now, I'm just trying to show you that I would like you to think about using maybe a couple of different mixes of coffee and water. So the first one that I've done there, it's a really, really strong coffee, and then I decanted a little bit of that into a second pot, and then added more water. So I've essentially got two different tones of the coffee, which is going to help me for my drawing. And then just having a go experimenting with putting the pen on top of that, the antibac on top of that. It is great though if you can let them dry before layers. Here are some results of the experiments I conducted earlier. I'm just trying to have a go experimenting on scrap paper before I start my real one, and I would really encourage you to do the same. Okay, and now on to the real drawing. First I observed the really white areas in my photograph, and I used my waxy oil pastel to go and plot down all of these areas in order to try to save them and keep them as white as possible. Hopefully this will act as a resist, and when I put the coffee stain on, I'll still have some nice white areas. To be extra safe, I am going to also add some masking tape areas, because this is a really effective way of keeping areas white, and I would encourage you to do the same. So have a mixture of some masking tape areas as well as using maybe a resist tool like an oil pastel or a waxy pastel, whatever you might have at home. If you have none of these, another thing you could try using is Tipp-Ex. That would probably work really well. I just didn't have any at home to try out for you, but I imagine that this would work really, really well. You can see now that I'm actually starting with the lighter coffee, so the coffee that has more water in, and I'm getting that down. I'm trying to put it on in a directional way, so trying to follow the direction of the petals here, for example, and you can see there the areas of white that I've tried to save with the waxy oil pastel and the masking tape are working. So putting that light layer of coffee on first, I've switched to a smaller brush here to try to make sure that I am not painting over the edges. So I would encourage you not to paint over your lovely kind of graphite background, because it will slightly make it go a little bit shiny, more shiny, which we don't really want. So try to stay within your shapes with the coffee. Okay, so a smaller brush might be needed in some areas. So there we go. I'm gonna let that dry now. Okay, before I go on to my darker one, so adding in my darker areas now. So this is my much stronger coffee. It has a lot more coffee granules in, not much water. So now I'm really looking at my photograph and I am adding in the darker areas. Here I've been doing some stippling with my brush, trying to recreate some of that sunflower texture. Notice that I'm still trying to paint in a directional manner. This will help to show the form of the object. If you have any areas that look a bit patchy where you have gone dark to light, if you get a clean dry brush, so just rinse your brush in some water and dab it on some kitchen roll or loo roll, and then if you then go and use this to kind of feather between the dark and light area, you should be able to smooth this transition over. This is what I did on the large leaf on the right hand side of the sunflower. You do need to act quite quickly whilst the coffee is still wet. So remember, add your resist first and then your lighter coffee, then you move on to add your darker tones of coffee in. I've let this thoroughly dry, I'd really recommend that, and now I'm going in with my blue biro pen. I'm not trying to go around and outline everything because that might look a little bit too artificial, so instead I'm just trying to add in some directional mark making, trying to define edges with shading, with texture mark making, and often you can see me dipping my biro pen into my pot of antibac first, because this makes it bleed immediately as I touch my drawing. And then of course I can also go over with my paintbrush and antibac to get even more bleeding and to really make that blue even more bright and vivid. Okay, so you can see me doing a mixture and really just kind of layering up my biro pen and my antibac. So I'd like you to really have fun with this part. Don't worry if you start to look at your photograph less and less. I definitely did. Just try to define your internal shapes as much as you can, add some energetic mark making and get some lovely tones of the vivid blue colour by using that antibac.